Hail Caesar is a new Cohen Brothers film, and it stars George Clooney, Channing Tatum, Jonah Hill, Scarlett Johansson, Josh Brolin. So many people in this movie. This movie is filled of great actors. They put together a great cast, and it's directed by the legendary Cohen Brothers. This is definitely a fun film to watch, but it's definitely not one of the best Coen Brothers films because there's a large portion of it that is not quite as exciting as I could have hoped it to have been. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the acting. The acting is top-notch. They are top A-list celebrities in this film, and they all knock it out of the park. They are all fun to watch. They all have their own special scene, is how I like to think about this movie, is Josh Brolin is the leading force. He's the leading man here. He's the studio exec. The movie takes place back in the 1950s, and he's like a studio head of sorts. And he has to deal with all the personalities of George Clooney and Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum. And he has to deal with all these actors as the studio head. And so the movie goes through his eyes, and it follows him as he's trying to deal with all the personalities and all the problems that come up in basically what takes place in just a few days, or maybe just a day in this whole movie, and it's just following him throughout this day and how he's dealing with these problems. And what ends up happening is just George Clooney is like the big star, and he gets kidnapped. Basically, he's the big star, and he's working on this Roman epic, and he gets kidnapped by, I'm not going to tell you, but he gets kidnapped by someone, and that leads the story into Josh Brolin having to find out, okay, what happened to him, how he's going to deal with that situation, and then he interacts with Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum, and he's moving back and forth and dealing with all these problems, and in the meantime, he's dealing with work problems and having another job maybe, and it follows him, and it's super entertaining to watch, and that's what I loved about this movie, is just watching this old style of filmmaking. Josh Brolin goes to different movie sets, and you see several different scenes, each starring the specific characters, one starring Scarlett Johansson, one starring Channing Tatum. It was almost like just certain scenes set up for these characters, and I really loved that. That was my favorite part about the film, especially the scene with this guy that I've never really heard of, Eldon Elhenrick. He blew me away. He was my favorite part of the whole film. He would play like this cowboy kid, and basically he's more used to just doing Western films where he doesn't have to say much or act very much, and he just rides a horse and saves the girl, and that's really what he's used to. But then all of a sudden he gets put into this Shakespearean like acting piece, and he has to really do classical training and all this, and that scene was by far my favorite. He was hilarious. Him dealing with the director and trying to get some of the lines out was hilarious. I absolutely loved it. That's what I loved about this movie, is just those scenes, because it's the old style of filmmaking, and it's so entertaining. If you're a fan of movies whatsoever, though, you can find enjoyment in just that, because it was so much fun watching just how it used to be back then. It reminded me a lot of The Artist, how it brought you back to that type of old style filmmaking, and just seeing how it was and seeing how they worked, and it was very entertaining to see that. Unfortunately, the movie has a whole side plot with the whole George Clooney thing that from the trailers I thought seemed very intriguing. I was very interested to see what was behind all that and why he was kidnapped. But unfortunately, that whole part of the movie was rather disappointing and somewhat boring. It really just didn't really add anything to the movie overall on the grand scheme of things, and it really left me just disappointed, which kind of sucks, because that was the part that I was most interested in seeing. But what ended up happening is I got what I wanted with the old style Hollywood and those classic scenes and all that, and that was what I loved most about it, and I was really looking forward to seeing that, and I got it. But the whole George Clooney part of it was very disappointing, and it really brought it down for me, because it could have been, I thought, a fantastic movie, and it ended up being a good movie. overall, the directing I thought was top notch. The Coen Brothers are legends at this point. They are fantastic directors. This is definitely not their best film. My favorite is probably The Big Lebowski. I mean, whose isn't? It's the dude, you know. They've made such funny, clever films before, and I thought that this could have been the same type of thing if the George Clooney thing paid off. But I felt that it didn't, so it's not one of my favorites by them, but I still enjoyed watching it so much because of the old classic Hollywood. They did a fantastic job just making you feel like you were in that era, and you felt like you were there. And by the way, I want to bring up Josh Brolin. He blew me away. I'm a fan of Josh Brolin. I like seeing him in movies. He really blew me away in Everest. But in this movie, you could tell how much fun he had just dealing with these actors and like bouncing off of them, and like just he really hammed it up, and you could tell that he had fun. Everybody had fun in this movie. You could just tell because you were having fun watching them have fun, and that's what I was disappointed with George Clooney, because he had fun being in the Roman epic type thing and like doing those scenes, and those scenes were really fun with him. But the whole mystery part that I don't want to spoil, I felt like it was almost boring for him, and like you could tell because there wasn't much there, and so that part of the story really brought it down for me. And unfortunately, it takes up a good portion of the movie. But overall, I could get past that and get back to the old Hollywood scenes because that's what I loved most. Anyway, overall, I thought this was a fun film. I expected great things and I got good things, but it still passed. It still passed as a good movie for me. I really enjoy it. If you are interested at all in Hollywood and old Hollywood and just behind-the-scenes acting stuff, which I love just behind-the-scenes stuff. It's the most fun thing for me to watch in movies. If you're a fan of that, I recommend the movie. I think there's enough enjoyment in there to be had. Just don't expect too much out of the George Clooney part of it because it was disappointing. And also, this doesn't really take too much out of the movie for me, but it's just a weird thing that I have to mention, and I'm not going to spoil it, but the movie wraps itself up nice, and then it just ends. It just goes to the title cards, and it was very jarring. It just happened out of nowhere. It was very odd. Again, it's like the very end of the movie, so it doesn't really take too much away, but it was like kind of like, okay, like, oh, I guess it's over now. Anyway, overall, I enjoyed the film quite a bit. I recommend it if you are interested in the old Hollywood stuff. Just don't expect too much out of that whole George Clooney part, but overall, I definitely recommend watching it. I really liked it. I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. Good job, everybody. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you like this and you want to see more reviews from a guy like me, you can subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.